Today's Photoshop tutorial is primarily focused on blending, and what we're going to do is we're going to take this very basic alien photo manipulation image and we're going to combine all of these different effects so that way we can blend these components together to create one visually stunning image. You definitely don't want to miss out on this. I got a lot of fun tips and tricks along the way that you can apply to your own personal work, so let's not waste any more time and let's get right to it. Alright, so to start things off here, we got a 5000 by 4000 canvas size, and we're using this star background image here. We're going to Command T to scale this up so that way it fits the whole canvas. Let's go ahead and right click and flip this vertically. And the next thing we want to do is bring in Earth, and we can scale this up as well so that way it fits the width of our canvas. And then we're going to just kind of put this towards the bottom here. And we want to get rid of that top part, so we're going to add a layer mask and then press P for our pen tool. And then essentially we just want to create a selection of just that top black part, so that way we can fill that layer mask with black and get rid of it. Alright, so now that we have that connected, we're going to make a selection, fill it with black, and then Command D to deselect. Alright, so now that our Earth's in place, we're bringing in our alien, and we're going to have to scale this guy up quite a bit because I want him to fill up that top part of the canvas. So we need to zoom out so that way I can kind of get a better idea to see what the scale looks like. And that looks pretty good. So then we can press Enter and then zoom back in. Alright, so what I want to do is give the illusion that he's holding Earth. So I'm going to go to Edit, go down to my Puppet Warp tool, and let's go ahead and put some pins all over so that way most of the body is not going to get pulled as we manipulate his arm, because I need his arm to be a little bit further away from his chest than what it currently is to give that illusion. So I'm going to put these points kind of in different joints, and then right here we're just going to pull this out a little bit, and even his arm, we can pull that out a little bit as well. So I think somewhere right around here will look pretty good for us. And then we want to do the same thing for his left arm as well. Okay, let's load Earth back in. And now we're going to bring a different view of another alien. We're really going to have to zoom out of this so that way I can see what we're doing here, because his hand's got to be pretty large. And we're going to rotate this so it's going to fit in this bottom right corner. And then I'm going to use my pen tool, basically like what we did before. And I'm just going to create a selection around these legs. And then that way we can fill the layer mask with black so that way we can erase it. I only want just this hand in the bottom right corner. And then we can even press Command T and then transform this and rotate it just a little bit more and play around with it so it just looks a bit more realistic. Okay, and then we can erase this unwanted spot on the left side here. Again, painting black on that layer mask. Okay, perfect. So now we just got to do the same thing with his left hand. Repeat those same exact steps once more. All right, and for this layer mask, I'm just going to invert it and then paint back just the hand, since it was pretty detached from the rest of the body. And we can even bring down our alien just a little bit. So again, it just kind of seems a bit more realistic. All right, and now I'm just going to take a second to organize my layers here. If you want to color code your layers, you can just right click the eyeball and then pick whichever color you want. But as far as the photo manipulation part of this tutorial, that's pretty much it. It's very, very basic. Like I said, this is primarily going to be focused on blending. So to kick things off, we are going to start with our lighting process. So with that said, we're going to use an exposure adjustment layer. Alter option, click on our alien so that way it's clipped on there. Let's lower the lighting down quite a bit so he's pretty dark. And then we're going to paint black on the layer mask to bring back some of the lighter portions of the skin. Make sure we have a soft round brush to do this first. And so we're just going to touch up a little bit on his chest and arm a little bit, and a lot more on his face. I kind of want to have the top of his head looks like it's disappearing into outer space, so I want to leave that kind of dark. We ultimately will have a glow on Earth, so that way that color and that light is going to be reflected off of the alien's face. Let's go ahead and add another exposure adjustment layer. This is also going to account for more shadows. And so once we've lowered that, let's invert the mask by pressing Command I. And like I said before, we want to kind of give the illusion that his head and the outside of his body is kind of disappearing into space. So I'm going to bring back some of the darker tones at the top there. And we can even focus a little bit on the edges, maybe a little bit under his chin. Just make sure you kind of take your time with this and realistically try to think of what parts of the body will have the least amount of light exposure. All right, let's go ahead and take care of his hands now. So we're going to start with the left hand first. And we're going to do the same thing. Let's add exposure, turn down that light. Okay, and that will do it. Let's go ahead and do that right hand now. And we're going to do the same thing. We're going to use the exposure and turn down the light. And now that we got our lighting levels at a pretty good spot here, we're going to start focusing a little bit on color grading. We're going to go back to our main body, add a color balance adjustment layer. And I want to go a little bit more for these blue tones because we're going to have that light reflected off of the earth onto the body. So we want to stick towards the cyans and the blues. And we're going to shift those sliders in those directions. And I'm adding a hue and saturation layer underneath so I can just desaturate that body a little bit more. Okay, perfect. Let's go ahead and check out this before and after. And we're headed in the right direction. So let's do the same thing with the hands now. This time I'm going to desaturate the hands first. And just to save some time, I'm going to open back up my alien group layer. And then I'm going to option click on that color balance, drag it up. This way it gives us a copy of that layer and I don't have to repeat those same settings. And for the right hand, I'm going to do the same thing for the hue and saturation layer and the color balance layer. And like I said, this is going to save us a lot of time in your workflow. Okay, let's push forward and let's start working a little bit on this earth. We're going to use levels to incorporate a little bit more contrast and just try to make this pop just a little bit more. And now that we have that set, I'm going to add a layer underneath the earth layer. And we're going to sample one of these blues on the layer here. And we can just slightly change up this color. And using a soft round brush, we're just going to introduce a little bit of glow just on the edge and on that rim there. So we're just going to lightly go back and forth just on that edge there, like I said, to just incorporate some glow. And whenever I introduce glows, I usually like to do a layer underneath our object, but then I also like to do one on top, which is what we're going to do now. And I'm using the right bracket key to increase our brush size. And we're just going to paint just on the top there and introduce a little bit glow, a little bit on top of the planet. And we can even go back to the one underneath, clean that up a little bit. Okay, so now that we have another layer on top, I'm going to go ahead and sample something a little bit more white. And that way, right here by the right hand, we're going to make that much brighter. At this moment, I'm going to go ahead and stick with this white color that we have, add a new layer underneath our earth, and just kind of paint along that edge and try to brighten that up just a little bit more. And once we have that, I'm going to go back to our earth layer. And on that layer mask, paint black, so that way we just can clean up this edge just a little bit, so that way our glow on that edge can go ahead and shine through. And this is looking really good. What I want to do now is I want to create a reflection of that earth in the alien's eyes. So I'm making a duplicate copy of that earth, converting it to a smart object, and then we want to duplicate that. So let's start with one of these here, and we want to flip this vertically. And we're going to start with the right eye first. So let's go ahead and bring it all the way up there and shrink it down. And essentially, we need to go to warp and try to kind of wrap it around the entire eye because it has like that bulging effect. So I want to make sure it matches that same curvilinear form. And some of these anchor points can be a little bit fidgety. So I'm going to do my best to try to, again, kind of match the shape of that eye. And then we can hit accept. And I'm actually going to bring this up just a little bit more. Perfect. So let's go ahead and add a layer mask. And we're going to paint black on that because we just want it to be a very subtle reflection on that eye. We don't want it to be, you know, catch everyone's attention right away. It just needs to be a very subtle hint. And then we're going to do the same thing with this left eye. All right, so that should do it. And we're going to do the same thing. Let's go ahead and erase some of this and just kind of blend it in with that eye. All right, so now that his eyes are done, I want to add a little bit more glow. So we're going to add a new layer underneath our earth layer. And essentially, we're just going to use kind of a blue color, open up this brush size a bit here, and just kind of do a few dabs just along the face and his body, just again to kind of create a little bit more glow in that reflection bouncing off the alien from the Earth's light. And then we're going to go down to our hands, and on that original exposure adjustment layer, I'm just going to paint black on that, so that way we can bring back some of those highlights just on the edges of those fingertips. So at this point of the game, you know, I'm just trying to think in my head what realistically makes sense. How is the light going to interact with our subject? So that's what I'm doing right now with his fingertips, and we can even emphasize this a bit more by adding a new layer on top of that. Let's clip it below, and we can use this white color as well, and just kind of, again, go over those edges just a little bit more at a higher opacity to make that pop and stand out just even more so than what it already was. And this should just about wrap up that hand. We need to go ahead and work on his left hand now. And so we're going to start out with just kind of painting a little bit of light around the edges. And then we can introduce an exposure adjustment layer to go ahead and kind of bring in a little bit more shadows, especially on that left side. So I've inverted that mask and now just kind of painting white to bring back some of that dark color. All right, let's go ahead and start adding some character to this piece. I have this image here. We're going to put it into a screen blend mode. And this is going to be a really cool effect that's going to be at the edge of our planet. And we can go ahead and right click, go to warp, and just make sure that it fits just along the edge there. And like I said, we're going to have a few duplicate copies of this so that way we can fill the entire planet. We need to add a layer mask, and let's go ahead and clean this edge up a little bit. Okay, so that should just about do it. And we can go ahead and bring in our next image. So let's make a copy. Let's bring that to the top. Same thing, put it into screen blend mode. And we're going to put this to the right side, go back to warp, and try to make sure that it fits nicely along that edge. And so we're just going to repeat this process over and over again. I'm going to go ahead and just kind of speed through this portion real quick. So I'll be back with you in just a moment. Alright, cool. So let's go ahead and continue to build up this atmosphere. I have this other space image that we're going to use for the background. And I'm going to put this into a screen blend mode, just like I did with our other images. And as I scale this up, I'm really just kind of focused on that right side of the alien, not paying too much attention to the left side. So I'm just focusing on one little area at a time. And I'm going to add a layer mask, paint black, and try to get rid of a lot of this unwanted area. As a personal preference of how I like to work, I don't like to make huge changes at once. I just like to gradually build up this process and just make little subtle adjustments. And just from my personal experience, all of these little adjustments that we're making right now will add up and eventually pay off in the end for us. All right, so I'm just going to take a couple more seconds to clean this up. And then we can go ahead and add another image, and we're going to put this one up in the top right corner. And now that we have that in its place, let's go ahead and clean up these edges just a little bit. Okay, let's move on to our next image here. Same thing, we're just going to use this into a screen blend mode, and let's try to find a good spot for it on the right side. Sometimes half the battle is just kind of configuring this and rotating it and just finding that nice spot that you want it in. So we'll leave it here. Let's clean this up. And let's go back to our original space image that we have, and we're going to add this on. So let's put it right here. Let's clean this up and blend it in with our background just a bit more. And then I'm just going to slide this down here on top of our other galaxy image that we had, just as a nice little overlay. Okay, so we're going to add yet another image to add on top here. And for this, I'm actually going to make a copy of that. So let's press Command J. And we're just going to work with this one for right now and find a nice spot here on the right side. Maybe somewhere at the bottom on the lower right portion here, I think will look pretty good. All right, and let's add a layer mask. And then using a soft round brush, let's go ahead and just kind of clean up those edges a little bit. So that will be fine. Let's bring in our other duplicate image that we had, and we're going to put this on the left side. What we're going to do for this one, though, is I'm going to add a layer mask and then invert the whole image. And we're going to go to our brushes and use like a dust brush or a cloud brush. And we're going to use this as a nice texture and paint white on that layer mask to just bring in kind of like space dust a little bit, just to bring in a little bit of color. And then we can make a copy of that. Let's move this maybe somewhere behind the head. Make sure that the layer mask is completely black, and then same thing, let's just paint white and just bring in a touch of color. All right, our background is looking really good right now, and I want to keep it like this. I don't want anything to be too crazy or wild because I want our alien and the planet to stay as our main focus, and I don't need anything in that background to be a distraction. So what we can actually go ahead and do now is start that highlighting process on our alien. And we're going to load up a solid color adjustment layer and clip it to our alien. And we just want to find a nice kind of bright blue tone to use. And we're not going to put this in any sort of blend mode. We're just going to invert the mask by pressing Command I. And then just using a soft round brush, we're going to start working along the edge here on the right side, because that's primarily where all of that light from our background is coming from. And we're ultimately going to do a couple of rounds of these highlights. We're just starting with this one initially and just kind of getting this rim light going on first. All right, so let's actually go ahead and add another solid color adjustment layer. And we're going to put this on top and clip it below. And this one, we're going to go ahead and put it into an overlay blend mode. And you can already see how cool this is actually going to look. So let's invert that mask as we did before. And we're going to start painting this back in a little bit, starting with the chest area. And then maybe just a little bit on the face. So like I said, we're slowly building up this effect. And what we can actually go ahead and do now is let's add a new blank layer. And we're going to use that same blue tone, put it back into an overlay blend mode. And I'm going to zoom in on the face here. And I want to just really accentuate a lot of these ridges on the face. And we're going to just make those pop just a little bit more and add some highlight to that. We can even go back to our solid color layer below and touch up a little bit more on this right side. So this alien's not quite as mysterious as I want it to be right now. So I'm adding this levels adjustment layer and taking out a lot of these highlights to darken him up. And I just want him to kind of dissipate into our background just a bit more. So I'm painting back onto our layer mask and bringing back some of those brighter points, obviously where that light from the Earth is going to be reflected off of the body. Now, as a way that we can blend our alien in just a bit more, we can add a new layer on top of our alien group. And using that blue tone at a low opacity, we can just introduce just a bit of soft light to kind of act as a glow. And we can even go ahead and lower down this opacity just a bit. I'm actually going to go back to our color balance adjustment layer for our alien and then bring back a little bit more blues into this. And I think this is also going to help blend him in just a bit more with our total image here. Okay, yeah, I think that's gonna look a lot better for us. At this point, I only have a couple things left I want to incorporate before we put this through the camera raw filter and wrap this thing up. So the first thing that we're gonna add is we're gonna go back to that first space image that we have, and we're using this image here to just, again, kind of create a little bit more effect on our planet and just emphasize that just a bit more. So let's go ahead and right click, go down to warp, and let's try to warp this along the edge of our planet. And once we have that, we're gonna add a layer mask and paint black on the majority of this image. I'm not gonna keep a lot of it, just to pretty much a little bit, just to add a bit more color than what we originally had. And next I wanna go down to this hand here and add some more blue. So we're using this color balance layer to do that. And we're gonna start incorporating some highlights along the edge of the fingertips too. We can start that process by adding a new layer at top, put that into the lighten blend mode, and using this blue tone, we're just gonna kind of start working along the edges of the fingers here. And to kind of get this middle finger here, we're gonna use a pen tool just to create a selection so that way we're not painting on top of any other fingers. And I actually went ahead and pressed Command H to hide those marching ants. That way I'm still kind of confined into this area. And I'm going to do the same thing with this finger on top. I know it might seem a bit rough right now, but we're going to clean this up and make sure that it looks good. And right now these highlights are a bit strong, so what I want to do is let's zoom out and we're going to lower the opacity just a little bit. So I'm just going to take the next few seconds here to clean this up just a little bit more so that way it doesn't look so rough. And once I kind of wrap this thing up, what we have to do is, as you can see on this hand here, we need to start adding shadows on top of the planet so it looks a bit more realistic. So we're adding this exposure adjustment layer on the planet, and we're going to decrease all of those highlights. And this is going to be just right under that hand where it's touching our planet, so that way it looks like there's a connection and not just kind of floating there. And it gives it a more realistic touch to it. So we're just going to spend a little bit more time here and just kind of go softly around the edge of the fingertips there and bring back some of that shadow on the planet so that way we can have that connection. So what I'm doing now is I'm using this solid color adjustment layer, and we're going to find a good blend mode to use, and probably somewhere around the overlay soft light should be fine. We'll stick with this soft light. Let's go ahead and lower the opacity and invert the mask. And I just want to darken up that backside of the hand just a bit more and incorporate some more contrast. You know, I don't really intend to have any light source coming from that direction of where the hand is, so I want to make sure it's nice and dark. Okay, so what I want to do now is I want to add a little bit more glow on top of the body here. So let's sample a color from the planet, maybe change it up just a little bit. And with a soft round brush and a lower opacity, just kind of touch up this right arm. And then we can add a layer underneath our alien as well, and just to kind of get some of that light that's reflecting and bouncing off the backside of our alien to kind of create this really cool glowing effect on the right side. Alright, so now we're essentially at the very end here, and we want to go ahead and put this through the camera raw filter at this point. So if you are on a Mac, go ahead and make sure that you have a new layer selected at the very top, and then press Command Shift Option E. If you're on a Windows, go ahead and press Control Shift Alt E. And then you want to turn that into a smart object, go to the very top where it says Filter, and then go down to Camera Raw Filter, and that's where we're going to do our final touch-ups. And this is going to conclude our video for today. I hope you enjoyed it and hopefully you learned something along the way. If you've been enjoying these blending tutorials, please let me know down there in that comment section. Please take care everybody, and I hope to see you back for our next video here at Blended Graphics.